Welcome to the Maverick Paradox Podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. But today, our guest is Annabel Kaye. Hi, Annabel.
Hi, Jude. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
I've never really seen myself as a maverick, despite your description of me as one. I've been running my own business and supporting other businesses for 38 years now. So I'm so used to doing my own thing and helping people do their thing. I don't even think in terms of labels anymore. But the core of what I do is to help people deal with the law in their business, particularly employment law and data protection law and outsourcing law, because mavericks tend to just go, nah, nothing to do with me, and then get fined. And there is a kind of middle way of actually figuring out how to do it your own way, but not getting fined. So that's what I do, really.
Yeah, and that's very key. I think it's interesting, though. We've had this conversation many a time about whether you're a maverick or not. And I definitely see you as willfully independent and very socialised, to the point where you can get what you want, in a way that's quite ethical. I think what would be interesting, though, is to think or talk about the nature of a maverick woman, because maverick women are very different to the men. What do you think?
Possibly. I don't really know that many people I'd label as maverick, but I guess that's usage of language, isn't it? I think women tend to hide their independent-mindedness except to their best friends. So it's hard to know. I suspect there's more of us out there than meets the eye, but many of us might be hiding under all sorts of guises, because it's quite difficult to present an independent front to the world and a thinking front to the world when you're a woman, if you're in certain environments. So I think they go in disguise. It's not quite the same as being socialised. It's more underground.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because I do mention that a bit in my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders, where I say that you don't tend to have extreme maverick women because the world won't accept extremism from women. And as women like to get what they want and do it in the way they want to, that they'll tend to become a bit more socialised to be a little bit more acceptable. So the people that you work with, particularly the women, is there anything that you want to talk about there in terms of how they differ?
I think even the most maverick of women, the most independent of women, has this little script in her head about, should I be pleasing other people? There are very few women who don't have that script at all. It's a bit of a curse, really, because you go, I know I should be doing this, but everyone will hate me if I say so. So quite a lot of the women I work with know perfectly well what needs to be done, but find it difficult to bring that into the world from where they're standing at the moment. And this can result in some very, very erratic behaviour, because they get very frustrated and then they become the diva from hell and everyone goes, there we are, we always knew you were difficult. When in fact, if they'd kind of acted and spoken up earlier, it might have been easier for everyone.
So do you help them do that?
In a way. I mean, I don't see myself as a coach or a counsellor, but I think the secret to positive relationships is to have boundaries that everyone understands and agrees are fair. And for a maverick, this is really important because it flushes out people we can't work with as much as it helps us to work with the people we can.
Yeah, because I've, as you know, I've followed you quite a bit on social media now. And one of the things that you say is that you won't work with everybody and you have a certain style of working.
Well, I haven't put it quite that way socially,
like it, then that's tough. Has that worked for you? Has that worked for you? Does that draw you the right type of people?
I find it extremely difficult to work with people who don't know what they want to achieve. To me, it's actually bewildering that there are people who don't know what they want to achieve. I kind of accept it intellectually that there must be people who, when you're in the car and you're on the motorway, where are you going? Go, no idea, I'm just driving around. But to me, that's a very bizarre way to carry on. So I do struggle with people. And I have struggled in the compliance area, particularly in HR, where, we've both spent decades. With people, I say to them, what do you want to achieve? And they go, well, I just want to comply, or I just want to achieve best practice. And it's like, but that's not a thing. That's the way of getting to a thing if that's your chosen route. And if at that point their eyes glaze over, I'm kind of not optimistic about where this working relationship is going.
I think that's interesting because from what I would say about Mavericks is, especially socialised ones, is that they're very output driven and, everything needs to have a purpose. And it does frustrate me when people say that and you say, well, I remember being in the HR world and speaking to managers and saying, what is it that you want to happen? And, and they just say, I don't know. And it's like, well, how do I help you get there if you don't know where you're going? And they just look at you like, but you're in HR, can't you just make it happen? It's like, but what do you want? It's almost like they want to, it's like they want to.
I think that's quite common even outside the HR paradox. I'm very busy at the moment, as you know, with GDPR, which is a massive mindset change for a lot of people and a tiny step forward for others, depending where you were when you started your journey. But I'm kind of buried in people going, make me compliant. And I'm like, well, what is the purpose of your data collection? And they go, forget about that. I just want to comply. And it's like, well, how do you comply with only lawfully processing data for a purpose if you don't have a purpose? And then they think I'm a bit stupid and go find someone who'll send them 58 pages of policies. So it's interesting. Different minds work different ways. And it's a bit like learning the steps in a dance, isn't it? We kind of have to know, are we jiving or are we waltzing or are we doing a foxtrot? Seems a bit weird to set off and find out later.
Yeah. It's the one thing about conformist people that probably annoys me the most. Oh, apart from the refusal to think about things. So, have an opinion, but they don't know
the first
why
thing,
they
a refusal to think about things. I'm mellowing on as the decades go by. I used to think it was a willful refusal. You're just doing this to irritate me. You know perfectly well why think this, but you're kind of not going to tell me But I've come to realise that some people actually don't think in the sense that you and I are using it. They have very strong feelings about things. They have very strong perceptions about things. But it would be technically inaccurate to label that as thinking. And so to a degree, you can't ask it of them. It's not because they're stupid. They're probably really clever at perceiving things. Just like there's more than one form of intelligence. I think one of my biggest vices is assuming being able to think a thing through and articulate it clearly is the only way. And I do tend to go into kill mode with people who can't deliver that for me on a bad day. Well, I did think that, but, I've changed decades again, and I've come to realise that I think there are some amazing people that I regard not as irrational, which is a different thing, but transrational. They kind of get from A to Z without ever going through B, C, D or E. And it's not because they're very rapid thinkers, which a lot of mavericks are. They just seem to divinely intuit stuff. There aren't very many of them, but I've met enough now to know there are other ways of arriving at the end of things than mine. It's taken 60 years, by the way. Who knows what I might have learned in 500. But and I now realise that they're just on another journey, that we may have some interesting points of connection, but they'll always frustrate me if I go, but why? And it's best not to ask. But they're very different, the transrational thinkers, which is what I mentally label them as, to the irrational thinkers who just run about emoting stuff and want to know what's the big thing this week. Is it GDPR? Is it leadership? Is it management? What is it? I'll be into it and I'll manifest that. And then next week or next month or next year, they're doing something completely different because they seem to be driven by this desire to do what everyone does without quite knowing what it is or why they want to do it.
That's the curse of conformity. You know what? I'm really intrigued with this transrational thinking. So you're saying that there's a small proportion of people that just understand the world in an intuitive, emotional way that is as solid in that reason,
they just
in that
seem
emotional
to
reasoning,
get there.
as
Not
if
many
someone
of
was
them.
strategically thinking it or rationally thinking it.
You don't find hundreds of them on the high street, but I've definitely met such people and thought, wow, you know, how did you get there? They seem to have another route, like, you know, when you play computer games and they write doors in it when they test the games, they get from level to level without bothering to go through the rest of it. These people seem to have magic levels doors in themselves that take them to places that I have to think through and reason and consider and strategize, and they just magically arrive. Drives me mad, but it's good someone's getting there.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think I can imagine it's quite difficult on the surface to distinguish between those and irrational thinkers.
And I can only
because
test
I think
it
on
by
the surface
imitating them,
they may appear.
So I will ask people, why do you think that? And an irrational person will say to me, just is. That's how the world is. It's flat. Everybody knows the earth is flat. And after about 3 questions, I'll be like, okay, time I went and found someone else to play with. Whereas the transrational thinker will say, well, you know, the experience of my life has led me here, and this is how I feel about stuff. And I can't give you a formula for it, and I can't give you the building blocks. But this has been how I've experienced the world, and I've observed that other people do too.
And maybe these individuals are bringing in extra stuff like, you know, I don't know, quantum physics. You know, they seem different. They're bringing in different ways of reasoning.
Yes, and in fact, quantum physics is a typical one. I mean, I'm a great fan, but it's a moot point whether advanced quantum physics is rational at all, transrational, or just some form of religion that absolutely has a lot of numbers in it.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's where the transrational people are. They go, well, you know, I've considered all those things.
There, isn't it? It's like, at the end of the day,
this is how it is. The universe exists. I can't explain the maths. I don't know God's telephone number, which was something I always thought when I read Stephen Hawking's work. I always had this sense of him as a man who really wanted God's telephone number. I hope he's got it now.
Mm. Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think what you were saying is like, maybe the irrational thinker would say it just is because my friends told me, or I saw it on Fox News, or
I think that the irrational thinker is shallow in their processes, which isn't necessarily the same as being shallow in your personality. But the transrational thinker has quite deep processes, but you can't pin it down to 2 + 2 = 4, or this happens on a Monday, so that must happen on a Tuesday. They are some of our greatest sages and mystics, as well as our leaders in another area. And I always think the perfect combination would be the ultimate maverick with the ultimate sage. But we don't meet up very often because we irritate each other. Possibly. But a little bit of room goes a long way, doesn't
collaborate,
it?
Though, so maybe that's not so bad. Yes, if you're open to it. So one of the things that I've really liked about you over the years, it's going to sound a bit sycophantic now, is that the way that you're fast in your thinking, that you speak your mind, but with care. So you're not hurtful, but you're brutally honest, and it comes from a kind of compassionate centre. But I also like the way that if you think that what you have to say is going to be valued, you say it. If not, you just doesn't bother. So I like the way that you can do that, and how you can bring in that kind of thinking to the people that you work with and the people that you hang around with. I think it's a lovely way.
You put it very kindly and very generously. I think I've spent most of my life biting my tongue and occasionally thinking I really shouldn't have said that. I've had quite a lot of experience in meetings when I thought, who said that? And then thought, oh my God, that was me. I don't know if you've ever done that and thought, who did that? Oh my goodness, it was me. And I've learned that my directness of mind, intellect, I mean, I'm no great genius, but I'm certainly not an idiot, can terrify people. And I think, particularly come from a woman, by the way, that can be really challenging for men. You know, not all men, but there is a complete subset of men who find an intelligent woman in its own right frightening. And when you add forthright and actually she's in your face going, no, darling, that's never going to work, it's overwhelming, it's terrifying. And I've learned not to terrorise unless I mean it, mostly, I think. It's about where I've got to. There's nothing to be gained from frightening someone. unless fear is the only route to what you want, would be about where I sit with it.
I love it. I like that. So have you ever come across individuals that are... It's happened to me before in the past where someone has said, oh, you're really intimidating. And I've thought about it and I thought, but I haven't done anything to be intimidating. You know, I haven't planned to be, so I don't understand where it's come from. So you ask more questions and then it comes from you're so confident.
Probably, but I haven't hung about to have the conversation.
I find that intimidating, therefore you are.
I've decided quite early on in life.
Have you ever come across something like that?
That it's not my job to make myself smaller so other people can feel larger. And it's not, I will help people feel larger about themselves if the fancy takes me,
yes,
and I've got the time and the capacity, but I won't do it by diminishing myself. And I'm really not responsible for people who find intelligent, articulate women frightening. That's something they need to deal with, I feel.
Yeah, I think quite often it's in the words, isn't it? So like for me, I think there's a difference between your self-confidence, the self-confidence being the thing that's intimidating, or whether it's the person that's intimidating. So like if it's the person, you can do something about it. You can choose to be intimidating or not. But if it's a value that you have or a way of being, then that is so much harder because the only choice
is a limited number of choices, doesn't it?
Help them get over it.
I think maybe I was once described by a dear friend as the original short, sharp shock. You know, sometimes I think we are a learning experience when we don't mean to be and we don't even perceive ourselves as that. But we're all learning experiences to each other, aren't we? I mean, I've learned a very great deal from you. I've also learned a great deal from people that you would describe in terms of your book as conformists, because they're fascinated me. All my life I've looked at them and thought, how do they know what everyone's doing? Do they all phone each other when I'm out the room? It's some magic network I'm not in on when they go, right, you know, today's the day. And even as a very small child, I can remember being on holiday, and we used to have caravan holidays, my glamorous upbringing, and I was with a whole group of kids because our parents had gone down the pub and we'd been dumped in this caravan to entertain ourselves, which was perfectly normal at the time, by the way. And we were telling ghost stories, and my father came back from the pub to check on us, and he heard the ghost stories. So he started to make the noises we were talking about and to bang on the caravan, and he frightened everyone. And about 20 kids all piled onto a bed, and I stood there and thought, if there really is a monster and it comes in, it's going to see them because they're making a lot of noise and they're all in one place. I'm going to stand here quietly behind the door. When I was about 7, you know, and my father came in, frightened the life out of them, a very calmly little man, said, I thought you'd be there. He knew I wouldn't be where they were, but it wasn't in my nature to do what they did any more than it was in their nature to do
he knew you well.
What I did. It was just a difference, you know. I didn't resent them, though, for all being the same, but they came to resent me deeply for not being the same, which is often the case.
Yeah. People don't like the other, whatever the other happens to be. I think perhaps it's that Mavericks tend to, the first thought is, what do I, you know, when presented with something, what do I want? And then they start looking at, you know, is it the right? Is it fair? What, you know, whereas I think with conformists, their first thought is, what is everybody else doing? Or what is everybody else wanting? And I think that changes what you're going to do if you're thinking, is this right for me? Or
we must stand out. It is our function.
Do I need to fit in with other people so I don't stand out?
Mavericks
don't mind.
And stuff
Mavericks
like that.
enjoy it.
People in the crowd can be fine. They can be out on a picnic. They can be going to the movies. They can be at a concert, perfectly peaceful. But people in the crowd can also be a dangerous, murderous mob. They can have ideas that are truly toxic. And our Mavericks' job is we are the people going, hang on a minute. What on earth's going on here? We fulfill a function. We're like brakes on a runaway train sometimes. It's what we're for.
I like that. I like the idea of that. And I think it makes sense because, like I was saying in the book, that I think that Mavericks tend to be at least 3 months out, you know, for everybody else in the sense of they can foresee what's happening first, you know, with the canaries, and everybody else comes afterwards. So it's not quite the same as an early adopter, but if the Mavericks are always thinking, what if? And I suppose because when there's an issue or a problem, Mavericks start from first principles. Let's go back to what we want to achieve rather than let's start from what we have and then move on from that point. So they're constantly
and to that
reassessing
extent, we're not so easily swayed that we can be.
And looking at how different
ideas that everyone has. And I always remember that advertising slogan, I think it was in the 50s, of something like 20 million people, 20 million customers can't be wrong, or whatever the number was. And I remember looking at it at a relatively young age and thinking that's rubbish. 40 million people can be wrong. 1 billion people can be wrong. What has the number of people got to do with the rightness of the thing? And saying this to my mother, and she said, please discuss this with me outside. The people in this room are not going to like this conversation. Yeah, she said, you'll only upset them. This is not what we discuss over afternoon tea.
I like your mama by the sound of it. Actually, what you said there just made me think, because I think for me, I'm deeply suspicious.
Oh yeah, I think there have been a lot of experiences that make us feel that. I think also that Mavericks take a great delight in testing a thing by destroying a thing, or at least testing it to the point of destruction, which is very irritating. And when I'm on the receiving end of people going, well, this could go wrong, that could go wrong, have you thought about this, have you thought about that? There is a point when I think, just shut up, I want to get on with it. Had enough before this. It's a very irritating trait if it's not used appropriately. Yeah, I think if a total stranger walks up to you and goes, I think everything you've ever thought or done was rubbish, you're understandably going to be offended.
People you don't respect.
Whereas if a dear friend comes to you and says, I've been thinking about what you're working on and I have issues with it and I want to talk through, that's different, isn't it?
Cool, that sounds great. I think we'll take a stop there. So thank you for coming. Would you come again, young lady?
I'll be happy to.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Annabel as much as I enjoyed having it. If you'd like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group. My website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.